world is really messed up. And Nietzsche predicted this. Have you ever woken up with that strange feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with the world? You can't quite put your finger on what it is, but it seems like everything has lost its meaning. The news is a roller coaster of crises that never get resolved. People seem more irritated and defensive, and even simple conversations about the weather turn into heated discussions about politics or moral values. You're not imagining things. There really is something different in the air. More than 100 years ago, a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche looked at his era and had a disturbing vision of the future. He wasn't a psychic or a prophet, but he had an impressive ability to see social and psychological trends that would take decades to fully manifest. His predictions seemed exaggerated and too pessimistic at the time, causing discomfort even among his more progressive contemporaries. Today, when we look around us honestly, his words sound like newspaper headlines written yesterday. Nietzsche anticipated with impressive precision the moral disorder we're living through, the social fragmentation we're witnessing, and the existential crisis that haunts millions of people. More importantly, he offered valuable clues about how to navigate this storm without losing our humanity. Think about the last time you checked social media without rushing, just casually browsing through your feed. How many times did you see people fighting fiercely over things that used to be basic consensus among civilized people? A post about the importance of vaccines turns into an all-out war between groups that hate each other viscerally. An innocent family photo generates heated political debates in the comments. A new movie provokes inflammatory manifestos about morality and cultural decay. This isn't normal behavior for a healthy society, and Nietzsche knew this day would inevitably come. The philosopher realized that our civilization was built on moral and cultural pillars that were beginning to show troubling cracks. For centuries, deeply rooted religious values and family traditions passed down through generations functioned as a reliable collective GPS. Everyone knew, more or less, what was considered right and wrong, honorable and shameful, worthy and unworthy. Sure, there were always disagreements and heated debates, but there was common moral ground where constructive conversations could happen. Imagine a busy city where all the traffic signs were mysteriously removed overnight. That's exactly what happens when universal values gradually disappear from society. Nietzsche used the provocative expression, "God is dead," not to specifically attack religion or offend people of faith, but to warn about something much broader and deeper that was happening in Western culture. He perceived that modern society was progressively abandoning its shared moral references without creating solid and lasting substitutes. It's like carefully demolishing an old house without having planned another safe place to live. The result of this cultural transformation is completely predictable. Widespread disorientation, constant conflicts, and a permanent feeling of being lost in a maze with no exit. Today, each social group, each generation, each political tribe develops its own exclusive moral rules, creating communities that speak completely incompatible ethical languages with each other. Have you ever tried to explain your deepest convictions to someone who thinks exactly the opposite on fundamental issues? It's a frustrating experience, like trying to speak fluent Portuguese with someone who only understands Mandarin perfectly. It's not a matter of bad faith, ignorance, or stupidity on either side. You simply start from completely incompatible moral and philosophical assumptions. One considers natural progress what the other sees as dangerous moral decay. One calls individual freedom what the other identifies as destructive libertinism. One sees healthy tolerance where the other perceives corrosive relativism. These fundamental misunderstandings generate that constant social tension we feel floating in the air, that uncomfortable feeling that we're always on the verge of a conflict that could explode at any moment for any reason. This progressive fragmentation of shared values led society exactly to the scenario of profound disorder that Nietzsche feared: widespread nihilism. He defined nihilism not as simple occasional pessimism or temporary sadness, but as the devastating conviction that nothing in life really matters, that human existence has no true intrinsic meaning. It's not just a difficult phase or clinical depression. It's a deep existential apathy that completely sucks the motivation for any meaningful endeavor. You certainly know people like this around you. Individuals who work exclusively for their monthly paycheck, who relate only for social convenience, who consume compulsively to fill an internal void that never closes satisfactorily. Look carefully at the alarming mental health data from recent years, especially among teenagers and young adults. According to the World Health Organization, 1 in 7 adolescents between 10 and 19 years old suffers from mental disorders, with anxiety and depression being the main causes of disability in this age group. WHO 2021. Chronic anxiety and critical emotional states have exploded statistically, reaching epidemic levels that deeply worry experts worldwide. Many people of all ages frequently report a persistent feeling of existential emptiness, as if they were living their entire lives on autopilot, without clear direction or genuine purpose. Social networks promise authentic connection with other human beings, but in practice deliver digital isolation and constant comparison. Online shopping promises instant happiness and lasting satisfaction, but in reality brings growing debt and subsequent regret. Romantic relationships become disposable entertainment consumed quickly. Nietzsche anticipated that when we lost our fundamental shared values, we would inevitably fall into this dangerous trap of existential emptiness, disguised as superficial fulfillment. The nihilistic phenomenon manifests in extremely subtle ways in daily routine that we don't always recognize immediately. Have you ever felt deeply that your daily actions don't make a real difference in the world? That working hard, studying dedicatedly, or genuinely trying is fundamentally useless because nothing changes anyway? That's the insidious voice of nihilism constantly whispering in your inner ear. Many talented young people today report chronic difficulty finding lasting purpose in their lives. They start enthusiastically with 1,000 ambitious projects and can't finish any with satisfaction. They have access to more information, opportunities, and resources than any previous generation in human history, but paradoxically feel less capable of making important decisions about their futures. This widespread existential crisis connects directly with another social phenomenon that Nietzsche diagnosed impressively: the emergence of what he poetically called the last man. Imagine a typical person who systematically avoids any significant risk, obsessively seeks only immediate comfort, and lives in a state of constant emotional insecurity. Replace last man with emotionally fragile person, and you'll immediately recognize many defining characteristics of our current era. It's no mere coincidence that we live simultaneously in the era of parental overprotection and systematic avoidance of challenges. Think honestly about how many times you've heard someone close to you say with conviction, "I don't want to leave my comfort zone at all," or "I need to feel completely safe before trying anything new." Of course, basic prudence and careful planning are important and necessary virtues, but Nietzsche observed a much more dangerous cultural tendency: people who make systematic risk avoidance a permanent lifestyle. They consciously prefer boring but predictable jobs to challenging but uncertain careers. They choose lukewarm but safe relationships instead of intense but unpredictable passions. They opt for easy but empty entertainment instead of difficult but genuinely enriching learning. This widespread defensive posture creates a devastating domino effect throughout the entire social structure. Well-meaning parents desperately try to shield children from any frustration or disappointment, inadvertently creating adults who don't know how to deal constructively with inevitable criticism. Progressive schools carefully avoid activities that might generate temporary psychological discomfort, forming students with extremely low tolerance for natural adversity. Modern companies create corporate environments where any honest feedback is automatically interpreted as personal aggression, producing professionals who can't grow or develop adequately. The end result is entire generations of people who are technically very capable, but emotionally extremely fragile. Exactly the human profile that Nietzsche feared would emerge. But perhaps the most impressively visionary aspect of Nietzsche's analysis was his early understanding of how the complete absence of shared truths would inevitably generate unprecedented informational chaos. Today, Literally every person can find convincing scientific evidence to support practically any belief, no matter how objectively absurd. The internet completely democratized access to reliable information, but simultaneously democratized malicious disinformation. Sophisticated algorithms meticulously personalize the content each user receives, creating hermetic digital bubbles where our pre-existing opinions are constantly confirmed and artificially reinforced. Have you ever noticed how two intelligent and well-intentioned people can witness exactly the same public event and then describe completely different realities as if they had watched different movies? It's not necessarily deliberate dishonesty or conscious manipulation. They really see different aspects because they start from fundamentally incompatible interpretive filters. One observer sees social progress, where another sees moral decay. One identifies practical solutions, where another perceives only unsolvable problems. Contradictory information circulates through the network at exactly the same speed as scientifically accurate data, creating a cultural environment where distinguishing objective fact from subjective opinion becomes practically impossible for ordinary citizens. This permanent informational disorder directly feeds another psychological phenomenon that Nietzsche studied with fascinating depth: herd morality. When ordinary people can no longer easily distinguish what is true from what is false, they naturally tend to follow the majority group to feel psychologically safe. It's not mental laziness or voluntary ignorance. It's an unconscious survival strategy in environments of extreme uncertainty. Following the majority offers a comforting sense of tribal belonging and significantly reduces the anxiety of having to make complex individual decisions in a confusing and contradictory world. Social networks have transformed this ancestral dynamic into an extremely addictive modern game. Posts are consciously created, thinking exclusively about the emotional reaction of the target audience. Personal opinions are strategically adjusted to maximize likes and shares. Genuinely authentic positions are systematically sacrificed in favor of digital popularity. Have you ever honestly changed an important opinion because you realized it wasn't well received by your online followers? Or have you ever refrained from expressing something true for fear of negative reaction? This is precisely herd morality in action in the 21st century. And it's creating a society composed entirely of digital performers, where personal authenticity becomes increasingly rare and dangerous. The widespread fear of collective disapproval or social cancellation perfectly illustrates this tribal dynamic. Ordinary people who express even slightly divergent opinions can be quickly isolated and attacked by furious digital mobs. Competent professionals lose jobs for old comments taken out of context. Talented artists are economically boycotted for personal political positions. This climate of constant social punishment forces millions of people to adopt elaborate public masks that don't reflect their true private convictions. The result is a superficially harmonious and politically correct society, but profoundly inauthentic and psychologically toxic. Nietzsche identified in this behavioral tendency one of the main threats to genuine human development. When following the group becomes more important than thinking independently on your own, society completely stops evolving intellectually. Revolutionary innovations always arise from courageous people willing to question established consensuses. Scientific and cultural progress comes from individuals brave enough to propose unpopular alternatives. But if everyone is too worried about being socially accepted, who's going to risk being genuinely different? It's like an orchestra where all the musicians only play the notes that guarantee automatic applause, creating music that's technically correct, but completely without creative soul. This obsessive pursuit of external approval connects directly with another social poison that Nietzsche anticipated and analyzed: chronic resentment. Don't confuse this with healthy anger in the face of injustices or justified indignation against real abuses. Resentment is that persistent hostility that arises from compulsive comparison with others and the psychological inability to accept responsibility for one's own failures and limitations. It's the person who, instead of working constructively to improve their personal situation, spends all their mental energy destructively criticizing those who manage to grow and prosper. You certainly know examples like this around you. That person who always has a poisonous criticism ready for others' successes, but never a constructive suggestion for practical improvements, who systematically interprets every achievement of others as a direct personal offense. Social networks have exponentially amplified this toxic dynamic. It's infinitely easier to anonymously attack those who are prospering than to make the disciplined effort necessary to prosper legitimately. Destructive and gratuitous criticism has become much more common than sincere praise and deserved recognition. There's a growing cultural tendency to systematically tear down instead of patiently building up. Nietzsche clearly perceived that societies dominated by resentment weaken progressively and irreversibly. Collective energy that should be directed toward creation, innovation, and construction is systematically wasted on attacks, destruction, and revenge. We see this clearly today in public debates that focus much more on personally disqualifying adversaries than on presenting practical solutions to real problems. Professional politicians win votes by destructively attacking opponents instead of proposing constructive improvements. This cultural dynamic creates a vicious cycle where systematic negativity feeds even more negativity, generating a downward spiral of hostility and fragmentation that seems to have no end. In the midst of all this apparently chaotic and desperate scenario, Nietzsche offered a philosophical provocation that can completely revolutionize our perspective on personal responsibility: the concept of eternal return. Seriously imagine that you had to live your life exactly the same way infinite consecutive times. Every small and large decision, every moment of joy and sadness, every positive and negative consequence repeating eternally in infinite loop. Would you be genuinely at peace with this terrifying perspective? Or would you run desperately to change several fundamental things immediately? This isn't a question about literal reincarnation or specific spiritual beliefs, but about radical responsibility for the quality of our daily choices. How many times do you act automatically on autopilot, repeating behavioral patterns that don't do you good or contribute positively? Work you genuinely hate, clearly toxic relationships, obvious self-destructive habits, constant complaints about problems you have real power to solve. Eternal return functions as a cruel philosophical mirror that mercilessly shows how much we waste our precious existence on unconscious and destructive repetitions. Human history confirms this universal tendency toward repetition. Civilizations go through the same cycles of growth, prosperity, decay, and collapse. People commit the same relational and professional mistakes generation after generation. Conflicts resurge with different clothing, but identical essences. Nietzsche saw in this compulsive repetition an opportunity to awaken consciousness. When we internalize that our choices have eternal weight, we begin to act with much more personal responsibility. Faced with this apparently desperate and hopeless scenario, Nietzsche didn't offer pessimistic lamentations or nihilistic despair, but a surprisingly bold and hopeful proposal: the urgent need for what he called the Übermensch. This German word has been translated in many different ways, but fundamentally represents the courageous person who overcomes social conformism and has the moral courage to create new values when the old ones prove completely inadequate for contemporary challenges. It's absolutely not about physical, racial, or intellectual superiority, but about deep psychological maturity and total existential responsibility. Do you want to simply passively follow the chaotic flow, or are you genuinely willing to consciously build your own meaningful path? This fundamental question clearly defines the difference between the passive posture of the conformist majority and the active attitude of those rare individuals who become authentic creators of new values. It doesn't mean destructive arrogance or automatic disrespect for genuinely valid traditions, but developed capacity to discern when old patterns no longer serve adequately and when it's necessary to courageously innovate. It's the visionary entrepreneur who creates original solutions instead of just copying competitors. The responsible father who educates children with solid principles even when the cultural fashion is to let everything slide. The professional with integrity who maintains high ethical standards even under intense pressure to relax them. The Übermensch is definitely not an unattainable ideal, reserved exclusively for exceptional geniuses or mythical heroes. It's a concrete and real possibility for any ordinary person willing to assume total responsibility for their existence and choices. This necessarily includes the courage to make unpopular decisions when necessary, the discipline to maintain absolute coherence between declared values and practical actions, and the emotional maturity to accept all consequences of truly independent choices. These people become natural beacons of stability in a confused world, offering living and inspiring examples of how it's possible to live with authentic purpose and personal integrity, even when reliable external references are completely lacking. Nietzsche's revolutionary ideas simultaneously offer us an accurate diagnosis of contemporary problems and extremely valuable practical tools to face them constructively. The first essential tool is assuming total and unconditional responsibility for our lives. Instead of constantly blaming external circumstances or passively waiting for others to solve our personal problems, we need to act courageously as active protagonists of our own story. This means completely stopping complaining about the world and immediately starting to consciously build the specific piece of world that is genuinely under our direct control. The second fundamental tool is developing solid and unshakable personal coherence. When the world offers 1,000 contradictory directions simultaneously, genuinely mature people create consistent internal criteria to evaluate options and make important decisions. This requires deep and honest self-knowledge and crystal clarity about fundamental values that we don't negotiate regardless of intense social pressures. It's knowing exactly what we stand for and why we stand for it, even when this consciously puts us against the majority current. The third indispensable tool is strengthening principles through consistent and disciplined practice. Values that don't translate concretely into daily actions are just empty and useless good intentions. Building genuine character requires rigorous daily discipline to always act according to true convictions, even when this generates social discomfort or political opposition. It's consistently doing the right thing even when nobody is watching, even when it would be infinitely easier to give in to pressure, even when the benefit isn't immediate or guaranteed. In a world that has clearly lost its fundamental moral references, you have a crucial choice that determines your future. You can choose to become a passive part of the problem or an active part of the solution. You can automatically follow the herd and unconsciously perpetuate the chaos, or you can develop inner strength and personal clarity that actively contribute to stabilizing what's within your reach. Nietzsche teaches us that external crises can be unique opportunities for genuine internal growth, transforming temporary difficulties into permanent personal strength. Nietzsche's analyses of humanity's future have been confirmed with historically disturbing precision. The social chaos we're living through isn't accidental or temporary, but a predictable and inevitable consequence of the gradual abandonment of transcendent values without simultaneous creation of adequate and lasting substitutes. Understanding this cultural dynamic frees us from the paralyzing feeling that we're helpless victims of incomprehensible forces and empowers us to act consciously as agents of positive change. The constructive response to current disorder isn't in nostalgically retreating to outdated models or passively accepting destructive relativism. It's in courageously assuming the responsibility to create authentic meaning through conscious choices and coherent actions. Every person who develops this existential maturity directly contributes to rebuilding a world that seems to have completely lost its way, proving that it's still possible to live with genuine purpose and positive impact even in deeply confusing times.